Hi, I'm Didier. Welcome to the lab over in Paris at La Maison du Whisky. Today we're going to have a nice interview with Anne-Sophie, aka the Whiskey Lady, and we're going to be talking about beer and whiskey. Hi Anne-Sophie, how are you?
Hi Didier, I'm cool, thank you.
Okay, let's go. Beer and whiskey. So I heard the Whiskey Lady is actually moving into beer, which is kind of interesting. You're kind of taking the opposite track as the craft movement, which started with beer and went over to whiskey and other spirits. What drew you to craft beer, and what's the project all about?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Well, actually, it's not that new. I've been working in the craft beer industry for the last 3 years. I've been working for Brewdog, the Scottish brewery that now also turns into a distillery that you may have heard of, Lone Wolf. And also, I have opened my whiskey and microbrewery in the center of Toulouse for more than 3 years now. So it's not really new, and what drives me into that word is actually that both words, whiskey and beer, have a lot in common. They share many things apart from their raw ingredients. They also share the same kind of innovative approach, and that really is interesting for me to just drive creativity. That is a thrilling industry to be part of, and I'm happy to take a step forward with Icebreaker Brewing, which is the brewery we're opening now in Toulouse. It's been open since February, but with all this lockdown period, and it's not been easy at the beginning, so we're just getting really started at the moment. So it's going to be some exciting times ahead, we hope.
Now, clearly there are some links between beer and whiskey, starting with the raw material. I mean, both are cereal-based and particularly malted barley. What are some of the major differences? What makes a beer different from whiskey?
Talking about ingredients, the most important difference may be the fourth ingredient, hops, which is very important those days, especially as with the old trends around very hoppy, hop-forward beers like IPAs, New England IPAs. But the industry is also very different. It allows more innovation, more creativity. And it's also, when you look at the bigger picture, if you take a broader approach, you can see that many trends happening in whiskey at the moment came from craft beer. For instance, the old craft movement began with the US craft beer industry more than a decade ago. So I think that's the main difference, probably creativity and innovation, collaboration, even events that are done in the beer industry, they really inspire the spirits industry afterwards.
Okay, now because beer and whiskey are so close, people have been drinking them together for some time. Starting with simple beers just to chase your whiskey, but lately with the development of more flavorful craft, IPA style beers, there's been a trend to pair beers with certain whiskeys. So people are going to be looking at specific styles of beer for specific styles of whiskeys. First of all, do you have any general rules you can share with us about pairing and,
When it comes to pair a whiskey with a beer, I would actually take the exact same approach as pairing a whiskey with any kind of dish, being chocolate or cheese or anything. There's 3 kinds of pairing that you can do. One would be to have a similar approaches, to take for instance, beer and a whiskey that have similar aromas to enhance the aroma. Then you can also do opposition pairing, for instance, taking a very light beer with a very strong whiskey, in flavors. And the last one would be the complementing pairing. That is a bit more complicated, but it's about complementing really. You take a whiskey that would suit maybe add what lacks the beer. For instance, if you take a smoky whiskey, you can take a very chocolatey beer but which isn't smoky, and that smoke and chocolate works very well together. So that's what I would recommend when you do pairing. But don't just stick to rules. If you want to try anything, just try it. Maybe it's going to be good even if it doesn't follow the rules.
Okay, and what styles of beer would you suggest for specific whiskeys? So let's start with American whiskeys, for example, bourbon or rye. What would you suggest as far as a beer?
When it comes to bourbon or rye, I would personally go for something in the similar kind of pairing. I would probably try to find a beer that would be barrel aged in a bourbon barrel. Most of the time they would be dark beers, but you can also find barley wine, for instance, which would go very well and complement the bourbon. And for the rye whiskey, I would definitely try to find a rye IPA, which would be hoppy, so fruity, but also on the spicy sides of things, and then complement very nicely your rye whiskey, especially maybe you've heard of Michter's rye, obviously. I think a rye IPA and Michter's go very well together.
And so what about a Scotch whiskey, like starting with the big sherry cask whiskies?
For sherry cask whiskey, I would probably suggest kind of opposition testing, because a sherried whiskey tends to be very fruity, very sweet. So if you take a beer on the opposite side that's a bit dry, it would suit and balance the whiskey, and that would go pretty well. So you can look for instance, a lager, or something like a crisp lager, or a brut IPA. You can find some IPAs that are actually made with champagne yeast, and that's very nice, and it would complement nicely the sherry cask. But you can also take a completely different approach and doing complementing pairing with some very chocolatey stouts or porters, and that would add the chocolatey bit to the fruity sides. That would go very well, and you can add a chocolate brownie with that, and you would be sorted.
Okay, and what about like a peated single malt? Are there any kind of beers that work better with those?
So when it comes to peat, I think you can go in different directions. What I really like to do is to pair peaty whiskey with the Gose, which is a salty kind of beer. It's historically a German kind of beer that's made with salt and coriander. So it tends to be a bit salty, and you can find some Gose at the moment which are so creative, done with oysters and things like that, and that will complement perfectly a peaty whiskey. You can also go another road, which is probably more gourmet, and find a very, again, chocolatey porter or stouts that goes so well with a smoky whiskey. You can't go wrong with this one. And then the last thing that I would suggest actually to go and find a barley wine that is barrel aged in a Scotch whiskey barrel, and try to see if the whiskey can stand up to the beer, because sometimes when you've got a peaty whiskey, it kind of overwhelm the beer. So it's very difficult to find a beer that can stand up in this pairing with a peaty whiskey. So good luck with that.
And finally, what about the fruitier whiskey styles, like Japanese blends or Irish whiskeys, for example? What kind of beer would you go for?
A more fruity whiskey, like a Japanese blend or an Irish whiskey, for instance, Nika Days or a Redbreast 12, I would probably go for a Session Pale Ale or a Session IPA, because it would be still smooth, fruity, not too strong in alcohol, and it would go perfectly well with the fruit salad and those whiskey.
Okay, Anne-Sophie, thanks a lot for answering all these questions.
Thank you, Didier, for inviting me, and I'm really sorry about this terrible English accent of mine. Ciao!
If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up. Follow us for more. And the question of the day for the comments is actually more of a question to you. What kind of beers do you enjoy pairing with whiskeys? Are there any pairings that you've played around with that you'd like to share? See you next time.